Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other students at Riverside Community College. While her classmates spent their evenings at parties or watching movies, Sarah worked double shifts at the local diner to pay for her education. Her dream of becoming a nurse seemed impossible some days, especially when she looked at her bank account or felt the judgment from her wealthier peers. The small tattoo on her wrist was barely visible most days, hidden beneath long sleeves or a watch. It was a simple design, a compass rose with the words "Find Your Way" written in delicate script below it. She had gotten it on her 18th birthday with money she had saved for months, working weekends at the grocery store while finishing high school. The tattoo meant everything to her, but she knew others wouldn't understand. Sarah had grown up in foster care, moving from home to home until she aged out of the system at 18. The tattoo represented her journey to find her own path in life, without parents to guide her or a safety net to catch her if she fell. Every time she looked at it, she remembered the scared teenager she had been just 3 years ago, sleeping in her car and wondering if she would ever make something of herself. The problems started during her second semester in the nursing program. Sarah had been accepted despite her lack of connections or impressive resume because her grades were exceptional, and her entrance essay had moved the admissions committee to tears. She studied harder than anyone else, often staying in the library until security kicked her out at midnight. Her clinical rotations were going well, and several supervising nurses had praised her natural compassion and quick learning ability. But her classmates had begun to notice things about Sarah that set her apart. She never joined them for expensive coffee runs between classes. She wore the same scrubs repeatedly, washing them carefully each night in the dorm laundry room. Her textbooks were used and highlighted by previous students. Most notably, they had glimpsed the tattoo on her wrist during a particularly long clinical day when she had pushed up her sleeves while working with a patient. The whispers started small. Jessica Chen, whose father was a prominent surgeon, mentioned to her friend Amy that she thought it was unprofessional for nursing students to have visible tattoos. Amy Taylor, who came from a family of doctors and had never wanted for anything, agreed and added that she couldn't understand why anyone would permanently mark their body like that. Soon, a small group of students had formed an unofficial opinion that Sarah didn't quite fit the image of what a future nurse should look like. The situation escalated during a particularly stressful week in October. The students were preparing for their midterm practical exams, which would determine who could continue in the program. Sarah had been studying nonstop, surviving on vending machine sandwiches and coffee because she couldn't afford to take time off work to eat proper meals. She was exhausted but determined, knowing that this exam could make or break her future. During a break between study sessions, Sarah was sitting alone in the student lounge, reviewing her notes on medication administration. Her sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing the compass tattoo. Jessica noticed it first and nudged Amy, pointing discreetly. Within minutes, a small crowd of students had gathered nearby, not quite close enough for Sarah to hear their full conversation but close enough for her to sense their stares and whispered comments. "I just think it shows poor judgment," Jessica was saying, loud enough for Sarah to catch fragments of the conversation. "What kind of example does that set for patients? My father says healthcare professionals should maintain a certain standard." Amy nodded in agreement. "It's just so unprofessional. I mean, what's next? Nose piercings? Face tattoos? There's a reason most hospitals have strict policies about these things." A third student, Marcus Webb, whose family owns several medical practices, joined the conversation. "I heard she works at that diner on 5th Street. Maybe that kind of thing is normal there, but this is a professional program. We're going to be trusted with people's lives." Sarah felt her cheeks burn as she realized they were talking about her. She tried to focus on her notes, but the words blurred on the page as tears threatened to spill. She had worked so hard to get here, sacrificing everything for the chance to help others and build a stable life for herself. The idea that her classmates questioned her professionalism because of a small, meaningful tattoo felt like a punch to the stomach. The whispers continued for several more minutes. Sarah heard fragments about her background, speculation about her financial situation, and comments about whether someone like her really belonged in their program. Each word felt like another brick being added to a wall between her and her dreams. She had faced discrimination before in foster homes, at previous jobs, from people who looked down on her for her circumstances, but she had hoped that pursuing education would be different. Finally, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She gathered her books quickly, trying not to look at the group of students who had been discussing her. As she stood to leave, her textbook slipped from her arms and fell to the floor, landing open to a page she had covered in detailed notes and colorful highlighting. The book was clearly well used, with previous student notes in the margins and a cracked spine from multiple readings. Marcus picked up the book and handed it to her, but not before making a show of looking at its condition. "Rough semester?" he asked with a smirk that made it clear he wasn't being kind. Sarah took the book without responding and quickly left the lounge. She could hear the group resume their conversation as soon as she was gone, and she knew they were still talking about her. The walk back to her dorm room felt endless, and by the time she reached her door, she was fighting back tears of frustration and humiliation. Her roommate, Kelly, was out for the evening, so Sarah had the room to herself. She sat on her narrow bed and looked down at the tattoo that had caused so much judgment. The compass rose seemed smaller somehow, less significant than it had when she first got it. She wondered if her classmates were right. Maybe it had been a mistake to get it, maybe it would hold her back in her career, maybe she really didn't belong in their world of privilege and connections. But, as she traced the outline of the design with her finger, Sarah remembered why she had chosen it. The compass had guided her through the darkest period of her life, when she had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. It had reminded her that even when she felt lost, she had the strength to find her own direction. The tattoo wasn't just decoration, it was a symbol of survival, of determination, of the journey that had brought her this far. That night, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't let a group of privileged students derail her dreams. She had overcome far worse obstacles than their judgment, and she wouldn't give up now. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was fighting an uphill battle in a world where she would always be seen as different, as somehow less worthy than those who had been born into the right circumstances. The next morning, Sarah arrived at class early, as she always did. She wore a long-sleeved shirt that completely covered her tattoo, and she avoided making eye contact with Jessica, Amy, and Marcus. But she could still feel their stares and hear their whispered conversations. The incident in the lounge had created a divide that seemed impossible to bridge, and Sarah knew that her time in the nursing program would be much more difficult than she had originally imagined. As she took her seat and prepared for another day of classes and clinical work, Sarah touched the spot on her wrist where her tattoo lay hidden beneath the fabric. She drew strength from its presence, even as she wondered how many more battles like this she would have to fight to achieve her dreams. The compass rose was still there, still pointing her toward her true north, but the journey ahead looked more challenging than ever before. The harassment escalated over the following weeks. What had started as whispered comments in the student lounge had spread throughout the nursing program like wildfire. Sarah found herself increasingly isolated, eating lunch alone while groups of her classmates huddled together at nearby tables, occasionally glancing in her direction with barely concealed disdain. The situation became more systematic when Jessica Chen took it upon herself to research the college's policies on professional appearance. She discovered that while the student handbook mentioned maintaining professional standards, it didn't specifically prohibit tattoos that could be covered by standard uniforms. Frustrated by this loophole, Jessica decided to take matters into her own hands. During a clinical rotation at Riverside General Hospital, Jessica made a point of asking their supervising nurse, Mrs. Patterson, about the hospital's tattoo policy. Mrs. Patterson, a stern woman in her 50s who had been working in healthcare for over 20 years, explained that visible tattoos were generally discouraged but not strictly forbidden if they weren't offensive or excessive. "But, surely," Jessica pressed, "you would agree that healthcare professionals should maintain the highest standards of appearance? Some people might find any tattoos unprofessional, especially patients from more conservative backgrounds." Mrs. Patterson looked thoughtful for a moment before responding. "I suppose it depends on the individual situation. We've had excellent nurses with small, tasteful tattoos. But, I understand your concern about professional image." Jessica felt vindicated by this response and shared the conversation with her growing circle of supporters. Amy Taylor suggested they should bring their concerns to Professor Williams, who supervised their clinical rotations and had significant influence over student evaluations. Marcus Webb agreed, adding that as future healthcare professionals, they had a responsibility to uphold certain standards. The group's campaign against Sarah became more organized. They began documenting every perceived infraction of professional behavior, from the condition of her textbooks to the fact that she sometimes looked tired in class. They whispered about her background, speculating about her life outside of school and questioning whether someone from her circumstances could really understand the demands of professional healthcare. Sarah, meanwhile, was struggling to concentrate on her studies. The constant scrutiny and whispered conversations were taking a toll on her mental health and academic performance. She had always prided herself on her ability to focus despite difficult circumstances, but the persistent harassment was unlike anything she had faced before. In foster care, the cruelty had been more direct but also more temporary. She always knew she would eventually move to a different home. Here, she was trapped with these students for the entire duration of the program. Her work at the diner was suffering as well. Sarah found herself distracted during her shifts, making small mistakes that her manager, Tony, quickly noticed. Tony had always been kind to Sarah, giving her flexible hours that worked around her class schedule and never complaining when she needed to study during slow periods. He had been like a father figure to her, one of the few stable adult relationships in her life. One evening after a particularly difficult shift, Tony asked Sarah to stay after closing time. As they cleaned the empty diner together, he gently probed about what was troubling her. Sarah had never told anyone about the situation at school, partly from pride and partly because she didn't want to seem like she was making excuses or seeking pity. "You seem different lately," Tony said as he wiped down the counter. "Distracted. Is everything okay with your classes?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before the whole story came pouring out. She told Tony about the whispered comments, the looks of disdain, the way her classmates had formed a united front against her. She even showed him the tattoo, explaining its significance and how hurt she felt that something so personal and meaningful was being used against her. Tony listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as Sarah's story unfolded. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before rolling up his own sleeve to reveal a faded military tattoo on his forearm, an eagle with the word Semper Fi beneath it. "I got this when I was 19, he said quietly. "Just before I shipped out to Vietnam. My commanding officer saw it during inspection one day and told me it showed poor judgment. Said Marines should be disciplined enough not to mark their bodies permanently." Tony's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the old pain beneath his words. "I spent 2 tours over there, saved lives, lost friends, came home with medals and scars. But that tattoo was still somehow a mark against my character in some people's eyes." Sarah stared at the faded ink on Tony's arm, suddenly seeing him in an entirely new light. She had never known he was a veteran, had never imagined the trials he might have faced. "The point is," Tony continued, "people will always find something to judge you for if they're determined to put you down. The question is whether you're going to let their small-mindedness define your worth or whether you're going to prove them wrong through your actions." That conversation gave Sarah a new perspective, but it didn't make the daily harassment any easier to bear. If anything, the situation at school was getting worse. The group of students who had initially criticized her tattoo had grown bolder, making comments loud enough for her to hear and finding new ways to exclude her from group activities and study sessions. The breaking point came during a mandatory presentation in Professor Williams' class. Students had been assigned to work in groups of 4 to present case studies on patient care scenarios. Sarah had been deliberately excluded from the formation of groups, leaving her scrambling to find partners. Professor Williams eventually assigned her to work with 3 other students who had also been left without groups, not because they were outcasts, but because they had been absent during the initial group formation. Her new group members were initially welcoming, but Sarah soon noticed them becoming distant after they had been approached by Jessica and her friends. During one group meeting in the library, Sarah overheard one of her partners, Lisa, talking on the phone in the hallway. "I don't know what to do," Lisa was saying. "Jessica said that Sarah has some kind of unprofessional tattoo and that we might be judged negatively for working with her. But she seems nice enough, and she's definitely smart. I just don't want it to affect my grade, you know?" Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized that the harassment was now affecting her ability to complete her coursework effectively. She was being systematically isolated and undermined by students who had decided, based on their own prejudices and assumptions, that she didn't belong in their program. The presentation day arrived, and Sarah's group was scheduled to go last. Throughout the morning, she watched as other groups delivered polished presentations with matching outfits and coordinated visual aids. When it was finally their turn, Sarah could feel the tension from her group members, who seemed nervous about being associated with her. Their presentation went reasonably well, despite the underlying awkwardness. Sarah had done most of the research and preparation, and her knowledge of the case study was evident in her confident answers to Professor Williams' questions. But, as they finished and returned to their seats, Sarah noticed Jessica whispering to Amy and pointing discreetly in her direction. After class, Sarah lingered to ask Professor Williams a question about the upcoming midterm exam. As she approached his desk, she overheard Jessica talking to him near the doorway. "Professor Williams, I wanted to discuss something with you about professional standards in our program," Jessica was saying in a tone of earnest concern. "Some of us have noticed that certain students might not be maintaining the level of professional appearance that we should expect from future nurses." Professor Williams looked up with interest. "What specifically are you referring to, Miss Chen?" Jessica glanced meaningfully in Sarah's direction. "Well, I don't want to name names, but there are concerns about visible tattoos and whether that sends the right message about our program standards." Sarah felt her cheeks burn as she realized Professor Williams was now looking at her with new attention. She quickly asked her question about the exam and left the classroom, but the damage had been done. The students who had been whispering about her for weeks had now involved faculty in their campaign against her. That night, Sarah sat in her dorm room staring at her textbooks, unable to focus on the material she needed to study. The compass tattoo on her wrist seemed to mock her now. Instead of pointing her toward her destination, it had become a target for those who wanted to see her fail. She wondered if she had been naive to think that education would be her escape from the prejudices and judgments that had followed her throughout her life. For the first time since starting the nursing program, Sarah seriously considered dropping out. The constant harassment was affecting her grades, her mental health, and her ability to form the professional relationships she would need to succeed in healthcare. She felt more alone than she had since her early days in foster care, when she had learned to expect rejection and disappointment around every corner. But, as she traced the lines of her tattoo with her finger, Sarah remembered Tony's words about proving people wrong through actions rather than letting their judgment define her worth. She thought about the patients she had worked with during her clinical rotations, and how grateful they had been for her gentle care and attention. She remembered the supervising nurses who had praised her natural compassion and quick learning ability. Sarah made a decision that night. She wouldn't let Jessica Chen and her group of privileged classmates destroy her dreams. But she also knew that she couldn't fight this battle alone. She needed allies, she needed to document what was happening, and she needed to find a way to turn the situation around before it completely derailed her education and future career. The harassment reached a new level when Jessica Chen organized what she called a professional standards discussion with Professor Williams. She had convinced 5 other students to sign a formal complaint about the declining professionalism in their nursing program, carefully wording it to avoid directly naming Sarah while making it clear who they were targeting. The complaints cited concerns about certain students who demonstrated questionable judgment in personal appearance choices and suggested that the program needed stricter enforcement of professional standards. Jessica had done her research, finding examples of other nursing schools with more restrictive policies on visible tattoos and body modifications. Professor Williams, who had always prided himself on running a rigorous program, was troubled by the complaint. He scheduled individual meetings with several students to discuss the matter, including Sarah. When Sarah received the email requesting a meeting, her stomach dropped. She knew immediately that Jessica's campaign had reached the faculty level. The meeting took place on a Thursday afternoon in Professor Williams' cramped office. Sarah sat across from his desk, trying to keep her hands steady as he reviewed her file. Her academic performance was excellent, her clinical evaluations were strong, but she could see the concern in his expression. "Sarah, I've received some feedback from your classmates about professional standards," Professor Williams began carefully. "I want to give you an opportunity to address these concerns directly." Sarah felt her throat tighten. What kind of concerns, Professor? Well, there are questions about whether all students in our program are maintaining appropriate professional appearance. I understand you have a visible tattoo? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah had spent weeks hiding her tattoo, carefully choosing clothing that would keep it covered, but somehow the harassment had followed her into faculty meetings anyway. Yes, sir, I do have a small tattoo on my wrist, Sarah said quietly. It's usually covered, and it's not offensive or inappropriate. I checked the student handbook, and it doesn't violate any specific policies. Professor Williams nodded slowly. That's technically correct. However, we need to consider the broader implications of professional image. Some of your classmates feel that any visible tattoos send the wrong message about our program's standards. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. Professor, with respect, I don't think my classmates should be determining my eligibility for this program based on their personal opinions about tattoos. My clinical performance has been excellent, my grades are among the highest in the class, and I've received positive feedback from supervising nurses. That's all true, Professor Williams acknowledged. Your academic work is indeed exemplary. But healthcare is about more than just clinical skills. It's about professional image, patient confidence, and representing the institution appropriately. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Professor Williams suggesting that Sarah consider having the tattoo removed or finding ways to ensure it was never visible during clinical rotations. He stressed that he wasn't making any demands, but wanted her to understand the concerns that had been raised. Sarah left the meeting feeling defeated and angry. She had worked harder than any of her classmates, sacrificed more, overcome greater obstacles, and yet she was the one being called into question because of a small, meaningful tattoo that represented her journey of survival and determination. Word of Sarah's meeting with Professor Williams spread quickly through the nursing program, carried by the same network of whispers that had been tormenting her for weeks. Jessica and her allies felt vindicated, believing that official faculty involvement proved they were right to be concerned about Sarah's professionalism. The situation might have continued escalating if not for an unexpected development. Dr. James Morrison, a retired Army general who had recently joined the college as a guest lecturer for a special seminar on emergency medicine, was scheduled to observe clinical rotations at Riverside General Hospital. His reputation preceded him, decorated veteran, former head of military medical operations, and someone whose opinion carried significant weight in healthcare circles. Dr. Morrison was conducting his observations on the same day that Sarah's clinical group was working in the emergency department. He moved quietly through the unit, watching students interact with patients and taking notes on their performance. Sarah was working with an elderly patient who had been brought in after a fall, carefully checking his vital signs and speaking to him in a gentle, reassuring voice. "What's your name, young lady?" the patient asked Sarah as she adjusted his blanket to make him more comfortable. "I'm Sarah, Mr. Thompson. I'm a nursing student, and I'm going to be helping take care of you today." Dr. Morrison watched as Sarah demonstrated exactly the kind of compassionate, professional care that made excellent nurses. She anticipated the patient's needs, communicated clearly with the supervising nurse, and maintained a calm presence even when the emergency department became chaotic with new arrivals. During a brief lull in activity, Sarah was charting medications at the nurse's station when she pushed up her sleeves to wash her hands more thoroughly. The compass tattoo on her wrist became visible for just a moment before she quickly pulled her sleeve back down, glancing around nervously to see if anyone had noticed. Dr. Morrison had noticed. But his reaction was not what Sarah expected. As the clinical rotation ended and students were preparing to leave, Jessica Chen approached Dr. Morrison with what she considered a professional concern. She had seen him observing the students throughout the day and wanted to make sure he had a complete picture of the nursing program's standards. "Dr. Morrison, I hope you found our program impressive today," Jessica began with a bright smile. "We work very hard to maintain the highest standards of professionalism." "Indeed, I was quite impressed with the level of care I observed," Dr. Morrison replied in his measured, authoritative voice. Jessica saw her opening. "We're all very committed to excellence. That's why some of us have been concerned about certain students who might not be upholding the professional image our program should represent." For instance, visible tattoos and that sort of thing. She glanced meaningfully toward Sarah, who was gathering her things at the other end of the hallway, unaware of the conversation taking place. Dr. Morrison's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. Visible tattoos, you say? Yes, sir. I believe healthcare professionals should maintain certain standards of appearance. Patients need to have confidence in their caregivers, and visible tattoos might send the wrong message. Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying Jessica with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried an edge that Jessica couldn't quite interpret. Miss Chen, is it? I appreciate your concern for professional standards. They are indeed important in healthcare. He paused, looking down the hallway toward Sarah. Tell me, what did you observe about that student's patient care today? The one you're concerned about. Jessica was caught off guard by the question. She had been so focused on Sarah's tattoo and her campaign against her that she hadn't actually paid attention to Sarah's clinical performance. Well, I mean, I'm sure her clinical skills are adequate. But it's about more than just technical ability, don't you think? It's about the complete package of professionalism. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. You're absolutely right that it's about the complete package. Professional competence, compassion, integrity, dedication to patient welfare. These are the qualities that matter most in healthcare. He was still looking down the hallway toward Sarah, who was now talking quietly with one of the supervising nurses. The nurse was clearly praising her work that day, gesturing animatedly as she spoke about Sarah's natural ability to connect with patients. In my experience, Dr. Morrison continued, the most important professional quality is the ability to provide excellent patient care with compassion and skill. Everything else is secondary. Jessica felt the conversation slipping away from her intended message. Of course, but surely you agree that appearance and professional image matter too? Dr. Morrison turned his full attention back to Jessica, and, for a moment she saw something in his expression that made her deeply uncomfortable, not anger, but a kind of quiet disappointment that was somehow worse. Miss Chen, I've served in combat zones where the medics who saved my soldiers' lives had tattoos, scars, and stories written on their bodies that told of their courage and sacrifice. I've worked with nurses whose ink told the story of lost children, survived cancer, fallen comrades, and personal battles that gave them the strength and empathy to heal others. He paused, rolling up his own sleeve to reveal a detailed military tattoo that covered most of his forearm, an intricate design featuring his unit insignia, dates of service, and what appeared to be names of fallen soldiers. I got this to honor the men and women who died under my command. Every name on my arm represents someone who gave their life for their country. Do you think this makes me less professional? Less qualified to teach future healthcare providers? Jessica's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Around them, other students had begun to notice the conversation, drawn by Dr. Morrison's commanding presence and the sight of his revealed tattoo. The student you're concerned about, Dr. Morrison continued, demonstrated more natural compassion and clinical competence in one afternoon than I've seen from some nurses with decades of experience. She anticipated patient needs, communicated effectively with staff, and showed genuine care for the people under her watch. That's professionalism. By now, a small crowd had gathered, including Sarah, who had approached when she saw the commotion. She stopped short when she realized that Dr. Morrison was talking about her, and that his sleeve was rolled up to reveal his extensive military tattoo. Dr. Morrison noticed Sarah's approach and turned to address her directly. Miss Martinez, I observed your work today in the emergency department. Exceptional patient care and clinical judgment. Your supervising nurse spoke very highly of your performance. Sarah was stunned. She had been expecting more criticism, more questions about her professionalism. Instead, this distinguished military officer and medical expert was praising her work in front of her classmates. Thank you, sir, she managed to say. Dr. Morrison rolled down his sleeve, covering the tattoo that had commanded the attention of everyone in the hallway. In healthcare, we're privileged to care for people in their most vulnerable moments. What matters is our skill, our compassion, and our commitment to their welfare. Everything else is just noise. The crowd of students began to disperse, but the impact of Dr. Morrison's words lingered. Jessica Chen walked away in silence, her campaign against Sarah suddenly looking petty and misguided in the face of a respected authority figure's clear disapproval of her attitude. Sarah remained in the hallway as the other students left, still processing what had just happened. For weeks, she had felt isolated and judged by her classmates. Now, a decorated general had not only defended her but revealed his own meaningful body art, making it clear that tattoos and professionalism were not mutually exclusive. As Dr. Morrison prepared to leave, he approached Sarah one more time. "Miss Martinez, don't let small-minded people discourage you from pursuing your calling. Healthcare needs more professionals with your natural compassion and dedication." Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Dr. Morrison. That means more than you know." "Keep your focus on what truly matters," he said simply. "The patients you serve won't care about anything except whether you can help them heal." That evening, Sarah sat in her dorm room looking at her compass tattoo with new eyes. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the symbol it was meant to be pointing her toward her true purpose rather than marking her as an outsider. Dr. Morrison's intervention had changed the dynamic of her nursing program in ways she was only beginning to understand. The aftermath of Dr. Morrison's intervention rippled through the nursing program like a stone dropped in still water. Word of his defense of Sarah and the revelation of his own military tattoos spread quickly among students and faculty alike. The carefully constructed narrative that Jessica Chen and her allies had built around Sarah's supposed unprofessionalism began to crumble under the weight of a decorated general's opposing viewpoint. Professor Williams, who had been wrestling with the complaints about professional standards, found himself reconsidering his position. That evening after the clinical rotation, he reviewed Sarah's academic file more thoroughly, paying attention to details he had previously overlooked. Her grades were not just good, they were exceptional. Her clinical evaluations consistently praised her natural empathy and quick learning. Several supervising nurses had specifically requested to work with her again, noting her unusual ability to connect with difficult patients. The next morning, Professor Williams called Jessica Chen to his office. The meeting was brief and pointed. He explained that after careful consideration and consultation with experienced healthcare professionals, the program would be focusing its professional standards discussions on actual patient care outcomes rather than appearance-based concerns. He suggested that Jessica redirect her leadership energy toward academic excellence and clinical competency. Jessica left the meeting feeling frustrated and confused. Her campaign against Sarah had seemed so reasonable, so obviously correct. But Dr. Morrison's public support of Sarah had shifted the entire conversation in a way she hadn't anticipated. Worse, some of the students who had originally supported her concerns were now questioning their own judgments. Amy Taylor was the first to break ranks. She approached Sarah after their pharmacology class, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I got caught up in something that wasn't right, and I'm sorry for the way we treated you." Sarah was surprised by the apology but accepted it graciously. Over the following days, 2 other students from Jessica's original group also approached Sarah to apologize. Marcus Webb remained distant and cold, but he stopped making comments about her appearance or background. The real change, however, came from an unexpected source. Dr. Morrison had been so impressed by the overall quality of the nursing program that he offered to give a special lecture series on trauma medicine and emergency care. His sessions quickly became the most popular in the program, drawing students from other departments and even attracting practicing nurses from the hospital. During his 3rd lecture, Dr. Morrison shared stories from his military medical experience that profoundly impacted his audience. He spoke about battlefield medics who had saved lives under impossible conditions, military nurses who had worked around the clock in combat hospitals, and the diverse group of healthcare professionals he had served alongside. In war zones, he told the rapt audience, you learn very quickly that heroism comes in all packages. Some of the bravest medics I knew had visible scars from their own battles. Others had tattoos that told stories of loss, hope, family, and service. What united them wasn't their appearance, it was their absolute commitment to saving lives and alleviating suffering. He paused, making eye contact with students throughout the lecture hall. I've seen nurses work 18-hour shifts to save wounded soldiers, performing miracles of care and compassion. I've watched medics risk their own lives to reach injured comrades under enemy fire. Not one of those heroes was judged by the ink on their skin or the stories written in their scars. They were judged by their courage, their skill, and their dedication to their fellow human beings. Sarah sat in the audience feeling a complex mix of emotions. Dr. Morrison's words were healing something inside her that had been damaged by weeks of harassment and judgment. But, more than that, his stories were inspiring her to think about her future career in broader terms. She had always wanted to be a nurse to help people, but Dr. Morrison was showing her that healthcare could be a calling that demanded the highest levels of courage and compassion. After the lecture, several students gathered around Dr. Morrison to ask questions and share their own aspirations. Sarah hung back, still feeling somewhat cautious after her recent experiences, but Dr. Morrison noticed her and gestured for her to join the group. Miss Martinez, I'd be interested in your thoughts on today's discussion, he said, including her in the conversation in a way that felt natural and welcoming. Sarah found herself talking about her experiences in foster care and how those difficult years had shaped her understanding of vulnerability and the importance of compassionate care. Other students listened with genuine interest, many hearing parts of her story for the first time. The tattoo that had once marked her as different now seemed like a natural part of a larger narrative about overcoming adversity and finding purpose. As the semester progressed, the dynamic in the nursing program shifted dramatically. Dr. Morrison's presence had introduced new perspectives on professionalism, service, and what it meant to be a healthcare provider. Students began focusing more on developing their clinical skills and less on policing each other's appearance choices. Sarah's confidence grew week by week. She stopped hiding her tattoo quite so carefully, though she still kept it covered during most clinical rotations out of respect for hospital policies. More importantly, she began forming genuine friendships with classmates who appreciated her dedication and kindness rather than judging her background. One particularly meaningful moment came during a difficult clinical rotation in the pediatric ward. Sarah was working with a young boy who had been in a serious car accident and was struggling with pain and fear. The child was inconsolable, crying for his parents who were stuck in surgery consultations and unable to visit during the day. Sarah sat with the boy, talking quietly and trying various distraction techniques she had learned in class. Nothing seemed to work until she noticed him staring at her wrist where her tattoo was partially visible beneath her pushed-up sleeve. "What's that picture?" the boy asked, momentarily distracted from his tears. Sarah looked down at her compass tattoo, then back at the curious child. "It's a compass. Do you know what a compass does?" The boy shook his head, still sniffling but interested despite himself. "A compass always points north, no matter where you are or how lost you might feel. It helps people find their way home." Sarah traced the design gently with her finger. Sometimes when things are scary or confusing, we need something to remind us that we can find our way through difficult times. The boy reached out to touch the tattoo, and Sarah let him trace the design with his small finger. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Getting it hurt a little," Sarah admitted. "But having it has helped me be brave when I needed to be brave." Sometimes things that help us grow are a little uncomfortable at first. Over the next hour, Sarah used her tattoo as a starting point for stories about navigation, adventure, and finding courage in difficult situations. The boy's anxiety decreased significantly, and, by the time his parents arrived for evening visiting hours, he was smiling and asking Sarah if she would be there the next day. The supervising nurse, Mrs. Rodriguez, had observed the interaction with growing admiration. After the boy's parents had settled in for their visit, she approached Sarah near the nurse's station. "That was beautiful work with Tommy," Mrs. Rodriguez said warmly. "You used every tool at your disposal to connect with him and ease his fear." That's exactly what nursing is about, using your whole self in service of healing. Sarah felt a warm glow of satisfaction. For the first time since starting the program, she felt like her personal experiences and even her tattoo were being recognized as assets rather than liabilities. Word of Sarah's exceptional work in pediatrics reached Dr. Morrison, who made a point of speaking with her after his next lecture. "I heard about your work with the young patient in pediatrics. Using your own story and experiences to create connection and comfort, that's advanced therapeutic communication." "Thank you, Dr. Morrison. I've been thinking a lot about what you said regarding using our whole selves in healthcare." Dr. Morrison nodded approvingly. "The best healthcare providers are those who can draw on their own experiences of struggle, healing, and growth to better understand and serve their patients. Your background isn't something to hide or apologize for, it's a source of strength and empathy that will make you an exceptional nurse." As the semester drew to a close, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her experience had changed. The harassment and judgment that had once threatened to derail her dreams had been transformed into opportunities for growth and self-advocacy. Dr. Morrison's intervention had been crucial, but Sarah realized that the real change had come from within herself, a growing confidence in her own worth and abilities. Jessica Chen had grown quieter as the semester progressed, seeming to realize that her campaign against Sarah had revealed more about her own character than about any legitimate professional concerns. During the final week of classes, she approached Sarah one last time. "Sarah, I want to apologize," Jessica said, looking genuinely uncomfortable but determined. "I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about what professionalism means. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that my focus was on all the wrong things." Sarah appreciated the apology, though she remained somewhat cautious. "Thank you for saying that, Jessica. I think we all learned a lot this semester about what really matters in healthcare." The final clinical evaluations were overwhelmingly positive for Sarah. Several supervisors specifically commented on her exceptional patient rapport and natural therapeutic instincts. Professor Williams, when reviewing her overall performance, noted that she had demonstrated exactly the kind of professional growth and resilience that the program hoped to develop in all its students. At the semester-end celebration, Dr. Morrison gave a farewell address to the nursing students. He spoke about the privilege of serving others and the responsibility that came with healthcare careers. Near the end of his remarks, he made an observation that particularly resonated with Sarah. "Some of you may face judgment in your careers from people who focus on superficial markers rather than substance. Remember that your worth as a healthcare provider will be measured by your competence, compassion, and commitment to your patients' welfare. Everything else is just noise. Stay true to your calling, and never let small-minded people convince you that you don't belong in this noble profession." As Sarah walked across the stage to receive her certificate for completing the semester, she felt her compass tattoo like a warm reminder beneath her sleeve. The symbol that had once made her a target had become a source of strength and identity. She had found her way through the difficult months not by hiding who she was, but by proving through her actions that professionalism was about character, not appearance. Looking out at the audience of fellow students, faculty, and families, Sarah saw Dr. Morrison giving her an approving nod. Tony from the diner was there too, beaming with pride at her achievement. Most importantly, she saw a future filled with possibilities, a career dedicated to healing and service, supported by the knowledge that she belonged in healthcare not despite her background and experiences, but because of them. The compass on her wrist had indeed pointed her toward her true north. Through the challenges and growth of this difficult semester, Sarah had discovered that her path in healthcare was not just about her own dreams, but about using her unique perspective and hard-won empathy to serve others who needed healing, hope, and the kind of compassionate care that could only come from someone who truly understood what it meant to struggle and persevere.